I've realized that what they do is basically take what we do and maybe polish it a bit and make it seem like it's theirs. So I really don't have time for international anymore.
I'm an explorer.
Life.
Misunderstood empath.
Undefined.
Multifaceted.
Human.
Jaunda.
Crazy.
I'm a genius.
Chakalaka.
Extraordinary.
Creative.
Freedom. I'm Dawn.
Africa's home. Africa is home, not just for me, but for everyone, because it's the cradle of mankind.
Man, damn it. Have you seen melanin at its best? Have you seen it at its best? Not at its darkest, but melanin at its best. Have you seen that black lady? Now she's black, but she's dark. And then there's that one, she's just caramel. And then there's that man, when you look at him, he's a fat as someone that damn it. Yeah. Africa is beautiful. Yeah. In all its shapes, forms, origins. Yo, Africa is beautiful. Africa is color, it's vibration, it's shades, it's darkness, it's volatile. But Africa is my grandmother, Joe.
We come from a particular history of suppression, of exclusion, of displacement, either physically but also mentally, and we redefining ourselves, we funding ourselves. We started to have this cross-border engagement, which have this undertones of intentions to render these borders invincible, meaning that we need to reconnect with each other again. And this means that we are still infant, we are growing. You know, most of the world is up there, they've reached their peak. We haven't reached our peak yet. So our peak is still coming. So I think for me that's what makes us different. There's still excitement and exciting development coming ahead. We're coming from the bottom up.
I don't know, I think because everybody else has been saying who we are. Everybody else has been telling our story as African people, and so it builds up a lot of stereotypes. We're not actually what people say we are, you know, we're not actually these sad people you must feel sorry for all the time. You know, I don't think that's who we are. I think African people are warm, bright people, good ideas, sometimes misguided, sometimes terribly misguided. But I think what makes Africa distinct, besides like our culture and our food and landscape and all that stuff, I think is actually the people.
It is familiar to itself constantly. There's so much familiarity I've driven from Cape Town to London through Africa before. It took us 11 months. And in that time, I got to see, I think we saw about 46 African countries. And there's a familiarity. It's a familiarity you start to get, you know. It's like going to a well-known, a friend of yours' place and knowing that, you know, oh, I've missed being here. And I think what makes Africa different, I haven't traveled much of Europe, it's familiarity to either its past, its present, its future, each other. You know, when you share in something, either sharing in victory, sharing in plight, sharing a meal, but let alone you're sharing, you will always share, you will always represent an idea of potential. And I think that's what Africa stands out. It stands out as potential.
My biggest influence to things are my mistakes. I don't know if that makes sense. My mistakes, they say hindsight is 20/20. I always look back at my mistakes, and that drives me to either want to make a different decision or to relook at an idea, how to fix it, where I've gone wrong, the decisions, everything, even in just in life, whether you wrong people or not, or so. I think that is the what that influences me, and almost that's what drives me. I don't have some people, I call it the megalomaniac thing, or people just wanting to be up there. So I don't have that pulling me. I almost have myself pushing me, my past pushing me forward. Who has driven me, or who drives me, or who's my biggest influence? It's a couple of people, but I do want to attribute it. It's weird. Nobody would ever believe I would do this. To one of my friends and my ex-boss, Legend Mangele. He's quite a big creative in the country. He's doing his own thing. We're the same age, and he's showing a lot of people in our generation that it can be done. You don't have to wait till you're 35 or 40 to start influencing a form of content, or to start curating the kind of content you want. And I think, working alongside him for around about 4 years, that has influenced me now. But on a greater scheme, I want to go cheesy and be like, my mom is my greatest influence. I really want to go cheesy and go, my mom is my greatest influence. She's been there from day one, from negotiating to study film, leaving IT, from the little phone calls I get that go, keep doing this, and you're my greatest investment, and I know one day you'll pay off. Even though she knows exactly that this industry doesn't pay off, or trying to monetize your ideas is not something a lot of the black parents understand. So when she was just standing behind me one way, I think for me it was just like, well, what's stopping me? So I think my mom has been my biggest influence, including Legend.
My mom is my biggest superhero, which is funny because when I was in my teens, I was like, oh my gosh, you're so annoying. But now I'm just like, oh, I have to see you. I just love my mom. And I think my husband as well, big influence, which is ironic because we're not even in the same field. We're not, we didn't study the same thing. Our careers are on the opposite ends of spectrums, but his hard work, his work ethic for me is, he just works really, really hard.
It's so difficult but yet simple. I think my mother is the biggest influence, mainly because, I guess I'm going back to the word, she was truly original, true to herself, true to the people around her, very giving, expecting less back, always wanting to help. I think she was the biggest influence. I think that kind of is the medium or mode that drives me in whichever interaction that I have. I do make my mistakes, but I think generally that spirit is deep within me, in my soul. Yeah. So she's the biggest influence in my life.
My mother's my day one fact. My dad's my day one fact. He's always lived a life I found interesting. My mother's always lived a life I found interesting. And as I said, they were artists in their previous time, or rather they are artists. So I think a lot of factors that make me are because they gave me that initial foundation to challenge the curiosities of life with a certain standing. So yes, I've traveled, yes, I've drawn inspiration from many places, but my parents, I think, inspired my outlook and the way I can navigate through life through trying different things, tasting different things. So yeah, I think they're my biggest influence, negative and positive. You know, our inspire. Yeah, it's very yin yang like that.
I don't think people that support or consume more international content than South African content or African content are turning their back on the country per se. I think it's a preference thing. You know, America has been in the game for long. They found this formula. They know what makes people tick, what makes people want to watch, what makes people wanting to come back and watch.
I don't watch soapies and things like that because I just don't. I watch cartoons, and most of the cartoons happen to be from elsewhere in the world: Disney Channel, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and the things that are not cartoons are mostly on YouTube. So I'll watch illustrators.
When it comes to TV, I watch international only because of the quality, but the storytelling definitely local because I enjoy seeing our stories told on TV because we've always heard them from our grandparents or all the people that used to tell us stories, you know. But when you see it on TV, you know, excellent.
I think, yes, you have to search for African art, but we also, you know, you can't expect the consumer, not you can't expect the consumer, but we can't expect the consumer to think like, you know, as an artist until we've trained them to, you know, the same way they've been trained for decades by the massive construction of like the mass media. So I don't think that they're turning their backs on African content and African artists. I think that they're just so used to what they know, or at least they're so used to how they access their content that, and you know, the distribution channels are owned by those people. So if we can maybe teach them a different way, maybe, you know, they'll find us easier.
The whole sellout thing is a bit tricky because somebody would feel like me working with Dove is a sellout because you know the drama that happened with Dove. But at the end of the day, people have to eat, you know, and people have to produce certain things. And that's why I'm saying it's a bit tricky because for me, a sellout would be somebody that moves out of the township and never looks back or comes back to basically help anyone type of thing, you know. And then when it comes to the sort of like production side of things where you produce and work for other people, I don't think you're selling out. You're just tapping into a different market because at the end of the day, you're able to come back, you know, and just do you the best way you can. So that's why it's a bit tricky because you know how in the hood you'd leave and they're like, you sold out. The reason they say you sold out is because you never came back and inspired all the other people to sort of like get into the same space you're in.
I don't care about those words because those words have been, I come from Durban, a world of the underground where people call sell out everything. They'll call sell out Double HP, who has just made a roll-on that's affordable to them called Status for them to not stink at the ciphers. But they'd rather stink because they're already staying for free in their mother's houses. They call sellouts people that now suddenly have a bigger market when that market is also questioning and is going back to what the music was. It's just bigger. Because I think people that call sellouts, I don't use that word. I don't use that word because I know business.
I think, like I said, somebody whose first point of reference and first point of contact and first point of anything is international, and you don't want to acknowledge what you have. For the longest time, I think, you know, obviously because of colonization and, you know, colonialism and all of that stuff, we're so used to looking at other people for validation. And I think it's about time that we look at ourselves. So because, you know, something is perceived as worthy by an international market, then we think, okay, cool, now it's good. But it was good all along. you know. And so when I think somebody who is a sellout is somebody who is seeking validation from people who don't even know you, you know. And this could be international audiences, this could be the West, this could be people in your own circles, you know. If you are an artist and you feel like you have to conform to a certain standard because that way, you know, you'll be accepted or it will be, you know, validated. That's being a sellout. So it's not only on such a large scale like international films or music, but even here in our small friendships and our small contacts and our small circles of art and what we do and the things that we work on, I think it's very easy to become a sellout.
I think is not true to themselves. When I was young, I used to think it was someone who was about the fake and commercial state of mind. As I grow older, I realize that I don't know everyone's journey. Sometimes what I may think is fake to someone is actually their own truth. So yeah, a sellout for me is if you're just not true to yourself, you know. And sometimes, I believe you're a sellout if you're trying to prove to people that you're not a sellout, that you're so done, you know what I mean? Be yourself, and yeah, that's the biggest buy-in.
You're from Africa. You're telling stories about something you know, not something you heard about.
Telling stories about African people. I don't know if it makes you an African storyteller. I think if you're African and you're telling the story, yes. But if you're not South African, or if you're not African and you're telling the story, I don't think so. Mainly just because you're writing from the outside in.
This thing of being African is really complicated because people think when you're black, you're automatically African, you know. What about white people that were born in Africa? So just because you're telling the stories of African people, that doesn't make you African. For me, I believe what makes you African is, one, you have to be born in Africa, which is obviously a basic recommendation. Two, you have to understand the African cultures, like the back of your hand type of thing. And then three, you have to speak like an African person. You can't say, I know this is a bit wrong, but you can't say you're African, but you can't speak another language. As Africans, it's normal to be bilingual. You know, we speak Pedi, we speak Zulu, we speak French, we speak all these languages. So for me, that's what I look at. Not just because you flew into our country, you told our story, and now you're African. Nah, fam, it doesn't work like that. You know, you have to be fully African. You know, and I know it also sparks the conversation of, but I'm African, I grew up in the burbs. You know, but you understand the culture. You can hear the languages type of thing. But the most important one, you have to be born in Africa for us to be able to say you're an African storyteller. If you're not, Mazrui, sorry.
So you gotta love your subject, and until the lion learns how to write history, will always glorify the hunter. So I think loving your subject, celebrating the image of the African, that makes you an African storyteller. That makes an African storyteller, because in the same way, people have often misled the world about who we are because they've had the opportunity to do so.
So therefore, whatever stems from me is African.
Can you raise the volume though? Yeah. Good. Masingene. Masingene.